Welcome everybody to the International Law Book Facilities online session on legal tech. As Laura said, I'm Katrina Crossley. I'm CEO of the International Law Book Facility, and we're delighted that so many of you have joined us this evening. Our thanks in particular to legislate for hosting the event for us today. To all law students who've joined us this evening, just a quick reminder about the International Law Book Facilities essay competition, which is open to all law undergraduates studying in the UK. The deadline for submissions is the 28th of February at 4 p.m. and the winner will be announced by Lord Thomas of Cumgeth and Professor Richard Susskind on the 31st of March. The prize for the winner is a week's internship with London law firm Brown Rudnick, and the best essays are going to be published on our website and also in various legal publications. So the essay competition is a chance for you to think about how the practice of law will be transformed over the next decade, and in particular in relation to access to justice for all and improving diversity in the profession. I hope this evening's session will also be of interest to you, of those of you who have finished your studies long ago. Legal tech is something we all need to think about. It's not going away, and who knows what's around the corner next. But hopefully for those law students joining us this evening as an event will give you much food for thought, and I hope it will inspire you to enter. We're really looking forward to your submissions. So for this evening, a warm welcome to our speakers tonight. We have Charles Breck, who is founder and CEO of Legislate, Chris O'Connor, Director of Solutions at LexisNexis, Frankie Garcia, Product Manager at Mindfoundry, and Nick Sherman, who is VP of Marketing and Design at Mindfoundry. Chairing our event this evening is Ellen Lake, Senior Associate at Clifford Chance and a member of the International Law Book Facilities Operating Committee. Our event is inspired by Professor Richard Suskind's question to the law students and lawyers who came to our 15th anniversary event on the 25th of November, when we launched our essay competition. He posed the question, do you want to compete with these emerging systems, or do you want to build them? And I suppose there's a gap in there's a piece in the middle, which is for those who are using those systems in their legal practice and using them to drive better value for customers and clients. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ellen, and I hope you find the evening's event interesting and stimulating. If you have questions at the end, you can pop them into the chat, and we will aim to address the questions to our speakers. And if you could mute yourselves and turn off your videos, that will help, video cameras, that will help us with bandwidth. So thank you very much, and hand over to Ellen. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Katrina. I suppose as a starting point, we should say that the use of sort of legal tech, law tech, reg tech, fintech, there are a lot of sort of techs out there. And so I suppose broadly legal tech is about the technology that lawyers can use to improve their provision of legal services. And sometimes there's sort of a division in that maybe law tech is the technology that non-lawyers can use to sort of work their way through their legal obligations and rights, but often they are used interchangeably. And I think what we're going to do in this session this evening is think sort of tech on a slightly more broader level and not be too narrow or prescriptive about what we mean by legal tech. So I think my position on legal tech, and the context is that I'm a senior associate at Clifford Chance. I started as a litigator. I'm now an investigations specialist lawyer, and increasingly I'm advising on tech issues, cyber attacks and ransomware demands and financial crime issues with using certain techs, for example. But also I use legal tech to make me a better lawyer, a more efficient lawyer, to improve what I provide to my clients. So I come at it from quite a holistic point of view. And I think my position on legal tech, and I recently read a short article on LinkedIn actually, so I'm going to nick this from the author of that, a guy called Colin Levy. But what he said was, to be tech savvy does not mean that you need to know how to code or that you must develop the apps you use to do your work. It means knowing how to make optimal use of the applications you use or need to use to do your job effectively for your clients. It also means keeping current with technological advancements that impact your practice and ability to deliver legal services. And that really works for me because I'm not developing apps. I've got more than enough work to do, but I need to stay ahead of what my competitors are doing. I need to stay ahead of what legal tech can help my clients. And it means, that I can deliver better legal services as a result. So that's me, and that's my involvement and my interest in legal tech. And if I can now turn to Charles to give us some background to his involvement, please.
So, hello everyone, I'm Charles Breck, founder and CEO of Legislate. We're a legal tech company helping the unlawyered create lawyer-approved contracts cost effectively. We were founded in Oxford in 2020, and we're now 11, split between Oxford and Seville in Spain. And really what we're trying to do is leverage technology to make it possible for people who are not lawyers, people who can't afford a lawyer, to create lawyer-approved and valid contracts, whilst also making the data in those contracts usable, searchable, and manageable. And we use a branch of AI called knowledge graphs, which is pretty much the opposite of machine learning in the sense that we're encoding knowledge and applying it to data to search for patterns and control outcomes, whereas machine learning is inducing patterns from data. And obviously both approaches are complementary, but knowledge graphs is the route that we've taken to guarantee the quality of the contracts that we're providing to our users. In terms of who the unlawyered are and how they use Legislate, they are small businesses and individuals. They do create quite a few contracts throughout the year. I was lawyered in my previous role, but I'm not a lawyer, and I would interact with contracts quite a bit. And really the behavior that we're trying to eradicate with Legislate is the whole process of DIYing templates, in the sense that there are plenty of online options for contract templates, but there's no way of verifying their validity. And because these templates are rarely tailored to requirements, opens the door up for DIYing, which can be very risky. And so we offer those templates, but in a way that they can be tailored to their customer requirements without compromising the integrity of the contracts. And so really our position at Legislate on legal tech is that solicitors have a role obviously in creating contracts, but there's a whole portion of society that just can't afford to use solicitors. And what we're trying to do is make those services accessible to the unlawyered cost effectively, by at the same time providing a quality service to them. And we also do work with businesses that have solicitors, and in this case what we're doing is allowing those in-house legal counsels to focus on decision making and delegate the authority to create contracts to business users. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session.
Thanks, Charles. Chris, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, thanks very much. So my name's Chris. I'm Director of Solutions at LexisNexis. Really pleased to host this event and delighted to have such a great panel and such a worthy cause. I'll just really quickly run through my background and my kind of very high level thoughts on the topic. So I always start these kind of panel sessions with the declaration that I'm not a lawyer. So I started my career for my sins as a consultant, a management consultant, and joined LexisNexis about 5 years ago. Done various different roles across the business at Lexis, starting in the corporate strategy team, moving through sales and marketing, and then most recently in the product team, heading up our solutions team. So solutions at LexisNexis kind of works on everything other than the kind of core products that you probably associate with LexisNexis, so our core research and guidance products. So we have a couple of tools in market already. One is Lexis Create, which is a Microsoft Word plugin that helps lawyers draft contracts and have various tools to assist them in Microsoft Word. And Context, which is a kind of data analytics, litigation analytics tool, which we are starting to develop new exciting modules for based on different data sets. why do I think legal tech is of such interest and such a worthy topic? I think it's really starting to gain traction. I mean, it's been talked about for a long time. I've definitely seen in the last 12 or 18 months legal tech start to change the market. I think it's reaching maturity and reaching a level of adoption. It's getting out of the laboratory and into people's day to day. So I think it's a really good time to be thinking about this. And very soon, this won't be an optional extra. This will be the core of what it is to be a lawyer. So we're right on the cusp of that. How does that matter in practice, and particularly at LexisNexis, how we're thinking about legal tech? I think it means that for us, we need to, and this transition is underway, but transition from being an information provider to a provider of answers, and ultimately to be a provider, skipping even answers and getting straight to solutions. So what I mean by that is traditionally at LexisNexis, you put a term in the search bar and it would pull out information for you. Increasingly, we're trying to preempt the answer that you're looking for and be able to use the information that we have to give the answer directly. And ultimately, you might even be able to cut out that search step, and you might be able to cut straight to the solution you need. So if you're drafting a contract, you don't actually want a more accurate search. What you want is to be able to complete the clause of the contract you're working on. And that is the evolution we're seeing, underpinned by the same core expertise. And I think this is true of the legal market more broadly, that those core legal skills aren't going to disappear, but it's about using them in a different way and augmenting the skills of the lawyer with technology. The other thing we're really interested in is looking at going where lawyers are. We spend a huge amount of time talking to lawyers, looking at their workflow, looking at where they do their jobs, and we try to go where they are rather than pull them out of that workflow. And I think that's another principle of legal technology. It used to be that things were standalone and very fragmented. I think increasingly we see the market is moving towards consolidation and make it as easy as possible for lawyers to use their technology. And for us, we think, as I said, Lexis created in Microsoft Word, we think where lots of lawyers do 80% of their day is in the Microsoft suite. So between Outlook and Word and increasingly SharePoint and Teams, that is where lawyers work, and that's where we're really focusing our interpretation of legal tech.
Thank you, Chris. Should we go to Frankie, followed by Nick, please?
Sure. I think I'll be presenting on behalf of Nick and myself. Just to kind of frame this discussion, because obviously access to justice, which was the kind of initial premise of the conversation, specifically refers to access to legal services and lawyers and courts and that kind of thing. I think as Mindfoundry, as we operate in the intersection of using AI in high stakes applications, we're really interested in understanding how AI fits into the picture of justice and fairness, which for those of you that are kind of interested in AI, that's something that comes up a lot. So in this kind of brief talk, I'd like to kind of talk about some of the huge problems in developing AI, and then I'll kind of briefly take you through what Mindfoundry does and our approach in response to some of those big kind of pressing issues. So I think to understand a bit more about fairness and how it's defined, as mentioned, this kind of comes up all the time, but it's really difficult to define and implement. So Arvind Nayarayan, who is a Princeton computer scientist, talks about how there are at least 21 mathematical definitions of fairness, and you can't optimize for all of them, right? You could have group fairness, you could have individual fairness, but that's something that's really hard to do. So just kind of putting that out there to frame that. But more broadly, I think, Nick, if I could kind of get the next slide, I think there's this sort of misconception about how AI is designed and developed. So this quote refers to Boris Johnson and blaming mutant algorithms for the A-level fiasco of 2020. But I think what this fundamentally failed to recognize was that, of course, algorithms and AI systems are developed and designed by humans, and the data points that are put in them are chosen by humans, of course. And if you kind of look deeper into the criteria here, one of the core metrics was the ranking of a school. And so by that kind of definition, it's not really that it behaved in a mutant way, deviating by the information it was given. It was kind of acting in accordance to that. And so kind of talking about this more in a legal system, as I know I'm speaking to a room full of future or current lawyers, I'd like to draw your attention to some kind of optimism that I think exists in the legal community about how AI and algorithmic systems could be used. So if I could get the next slide, please. Cass Sunstein, who is a professor at Harvard Law School, talks about how human judgment and decision-making is full of noise and cognitive biases, and this can kind of lead people astray, especially in a sort of judicial system, in the courts, judges, etc. And so he believes that AI is actually the way to overcome this and to help aid this process. But I think that I would encourage you to challenge that view and kind of consider it as one voice and kind of one interpretation of all these different pieces of information that it's received. And actually, we kind of think that AI should be used in tandem with human intelligence and really kind of combining both, which is, I think, really aligned to what Chris was saying before about how can you actually augment the workflows and intelligence that a professional might have. So just to kind of take you through some of that, I will go to what Mindfoundry is interested in. I think for the purposes of time, I might skip this one, Nick. So yes, Mindfoundry is an Oxford University company, and we are operating at the intersection of innovation, research, usability, and we're focused on high stakes real world problems which affect a person's life or take place at the scale of populations. And we are fundamentally interested in these three pillars, which we think can answer some of the challenges posed by the questions of ethical AI and responsible AI. So the first is first principles transparency, which is to understand how your model works. It's kind of not enough to know that it's accurate, but for it to be interpretable and to understand how it's accurate is going to be really important in future. I think there are a bunch of examples that maybe we could talk about in the Q&A, which, you know, models are right for the wrong reasons. And so that can be quite interesting. Secondly, as I touched upon before, is really this human AI collaboration piece. So we're not interested in removing people out of their workflows or automating and removing humans out of it. We really want this intelligence to work together to build organizational intelligence. And a part of that might also be this kind of explainability as well. And that's going to be crucial in system design of our products. So not only do you want a system to maybe be explainable to the computer science who built it, or a domain expert, maybe a lawyer, but maybe even the citizen who's being impacted as a result of that high stakes decision. And finally, we have continuous meta learning. And so the world continues to evolve and your AI needs to evolve with it. And so continuous meta learning ensures that your model can be continuously updated as well as optimizing the learning process itself. And I think what's going to be really interesting in future is that regulation, especially of AI systems within high stakes applications, we're seeing more and more from the Alan Turing Institute in their guidance and from Europe as well, that these systems need to be robust in the face of harsh conditions such as adversarial attacks and data poisoning, which I think will kind of be the future of continuous meta learning. So that is it in a whistle-stop tour, and thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you, Frankie. So clearly AI is a hot topic. I should say I'm keeping my video on and off for bandwidth, but let's see if I can try it now. And AI is a feature of and probably a challenge for a number of sort of legal tech products and the development of sort of legal tech and law tech. And I think, as Charles said earlier, legal tech or law tech can be based on various principles and technologies, which sort of AI is just the one. So Charles, if I could come to you next, what do you think are the challenges for developing legal tech? And is it just AI that's a challenge, or do you see other sort of hot topics in legal tech?
I think the number one challenge in legal tech is always user adoption. And I think partly why legal tech has taken so long to take off has been, and I'm not a solicitor, so from what I've heard, solicitors don't adopt tech very easily or very quickly. So I think, like with any tech startup, it's, you survive if you have customers, and if you're not able to get users, you're not able to get customers. So I think at a high level, that's the first problem that legal tech needs to solve, is can you get users? And in Legislate's case, we're going after the unlawyered, and luckily for us, there are more people who are not lawyers than people who are lawyers. Therefore, more people who could potentially use us. And so I think the next challenge that we need to overcome is, how do we make law and contracts easy to understand for this group of users, because a lot of people have a lot of questions, and that means that you need to be able to provide transparent answers, or at least point people in the right direction, because again, as a legal tech company, you don't usually provide legal advice, or at least you're not necessarily permitted to provide legal advice. So I think that's, on the education side, one challenge that you need to address properly. And then finally, when you use technology like AI, you owe a duty of care to your users. And so you need to ensure both that the product is transparent, and that users understand what they're about to do. For example, either through disclaimers or just check-ins throughout the contract, in our case, the contract creation process. But we need to guarantee a quality of a contract, even if no lawyer is getting involved. And in our case, we chose not to use machine learning to generate contracts, because a 90% accurate contract is not good enough. And so in our case, we're applying legal and logical rules to configure a contract. And that way we know what the possible outcomes are, and we can guarantee that 100% certainty that this is a good and valid contract. So I think those are, at a high level, the challenges that any legal tech company will need to overcome.
Great, thank you. And I see we've had a question about why is it hard for solicitors to adopt tech? Now, I am but one, and I probably can't speak for the whole of the profession, but I think it's probably worth saying that there isn't often a whole lot of time where you're sitting around. Time is money in a traditional system where we often are billing by the hour, and so you want to be obviously spending as much time as you can kind of providing getting fees for that billable hour. And that perhaps is something that people are increasingly looking at, whether it's the value of the legal services provided that should be charged, or the time you spent on it. And there's a big debate about how best you can do that. And so if you are moving towards a model where the price of what you're providing is based on the value, then perhaps there is going to be more incentive for solicitors to look at adopting new technological solutions and the like. But it's going to take time. The billable hour is a very ingrained thing, and so that's kind of my take on the difficulty of adopting it, is sort of the lack of time and perhaps a lack of incentive to do so. Chris, can we come to you on this topic around sort of the challenges of legal tech and sort of increasingly sophisticated tools in this area?
Yeah, sure. I actually think, interestingly, one of the challenges with AI is a little bit the hype surrounding AI, and a little bit of cynicism, I think, particularly from lawyers. And I think I'm guilty of this as well, but using the terms AI and machine learning correctly and in the right setting is really difficult. I think it does contribute to some of the reticence to adopt technology tools. But I think why is this important? Why is it a hot topic? Why are people genuinely excited? Because there's huge promise from unlocking data at scale. I think we're seeing legal technology and data analysis really cascade through different industries. It used to be a very small subset of technology companies, your Googles, your Palantir, who would do sophisticated data analysis and machine learning. It's now much more broad-based, and lots of industries are seeing the benefits of this. What does that mean in the real world? Actually, there was something I read the other week, which I think really brings this to life, about how data can solve problems. A group of researchers believe that they found the cause for multiple sclerosis, MS, and they actually believe it's caused by an infection. And the way this was found is that the US military keep a repository about 70 years worth of blood from soldiers. Every year they take sample soldiers' blood and they keep a repository of it, and they open this up to researchers. And researchers were able to look at people who developed MS and then look at the years before they developed MS at their blood and found that they had this infection in common. And that has flipped the study of MS on its head. And now they believe potentially with a vaccine, you could eradicate what was believed to be a disease that's nothing to do with infections at all. So that is really the power of data. And you can just imagine the value sitting locked up in legal data, in contracts around the world. And that's the real prize. And that's why it's worth investing time and thinking about how we can solve this. What are the challenges? There's a number of challenges. There are obviously some adoption challenges, as we've talked about. And I know this, I think we're on the panel, our job is to get lawyers to adopt technology. And we all know how challenging that can be. And it's for very legitimate reasons, as you outlined there, Ellen. I also think that there are technical challenges, and I wouldn't presume, I think some of my colleagues on the panel will be able to speak to that much better. I'm going to raise one challenge, which I think blocks and slows the progress here, but that's access to data. And exactly in that example I just gave you, the reason that research was possible was because there was this huge data set, this blood repository, and it was available and researchers could use it. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have in the legal industry. It's very, very difficult to build your training sets, to train your algorithms. And there's a whole load of reasons for that. Part of it is regulatory. Lawyers are very nervous about breaking regulatory rules around what information they can disclose. They're very reticent to give access to documents. Part of it is attitudinal, and I think the interplay between owned work products from lawyers, where they don't want to give that away to their competitors, and they fear maybe that giving it to a third-party tech provider might be somehow giving away some of their secret sauce. I also think there's a very legitimate concern around giving away client information as well, and very necessary privacy rules around that. I hope that the answer actually can come from the clients. I think this isn't something that lawyers themselves, law firms themselves can solve by themselves. And actually, we're seeing more openness from clients, and particularly when you get a bunch of clients in a single industry together who are willing to pool data, that might be the answer to create these kind of industry-specific data sets, where then the tech vendors can come in, train their algorithms, and build really, really powerful solutions. And hopefully keeping in mind that prize, as I just said, it's worth trying to find these, plugging away and trying to find these creative solutions to that access challenge.
Great, thank you. Cliche though it is, data is the new oil. Let's move on to a slightly different area. What does the panel think about the future vision for legal tech? What do you think the sort of next big thing in legal tech will be, if there is one next big thing? And we come maybe to Charles first.
Well, I'm slightly biased here, but I definitely think that there's going to be a democratization of legal tech, in the sense that there are lots of tools that lawyers have access to, whether it's a Word plugin or sophisticated contract management platforms, which are going to come down the chain to the unlawyered. I think that's pretty much our view, and I don't think lawyers should perceive this as a threat, because at the end of the day, there are many forms and documents which are generated by non-lawyers currently using very unsophisticated tools, and lawyers wouldn't actually be getting involved at this stage anyway. So all these tools are doing are improving the quality of service for those people and those use cases, and then making the data usable, which will in itself open up other applications. But I'd say for now that's where we see things going.
Thank you. And Nick, what do you think is the opportunities for legal tech in the future?
Well, it's not my area of expertise, but talking as of someone who has had to deal on the outside with being unlawyered, my background is originally in filmmaking, where I was a freelancer and was constantly subject to statements of work and contracts that were heavily lawyered, and I just had the only option. I could sign it or not accept the work, and so that put me in a disadvantaged position. I would agree with Charles that probably the democratization of a lot of this is inevitable. It's what software allows us to do, to take complicated processes that took people years to gain that sort of mastery, or they have the unique access to it, and to make it open. I mean, not it might be too bleak to say that the same thing that happened to travel agents and being able to book flights and know how to do that. Now it's super easy, but there still is that need for the somebody to understand how that all works. I kind of see that as an inevitable trend for almost all industries. But again, there will still be tons of work for lawyers. So it's actually more of an opportunity to say, how is it changing, and how can we stay abreast of it, as opposed to be afraid of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I would presume a large part of your role in providing solutions is sort of looking around corners for the next big thing. What do you think is coming for legal tech?
Yeah, I think I actually probably had an answer that's a little more boring than you might be trying to wing out there with your answer. I think I can give a more interesting answer in a second, but I think really genuinely the most transformational thing that's coming is the mainstreaming of legal tech, as I kind of alluded to at the start. I think, so at LexisNexis, we survey the legal market every 6 months in what we call our bellwether report. And for those of you in the audience, definitely worth looking out for that, for some kind of little vignettes of what's going on in the market. But certainly we've seen over the last 2 years with the pandemic and the move to working from home, there has been a sea change in attitudes to technology adoption. It started really small, even really simple things. We heard a lot about lawyers just moving from desktops in the office to laptops you can take home with you. Adoption of video conferencing and telco software like this, then to kind of the next stage of stuff that's been pretty standard for lots of industries, but now has become, I think, standard for the legal industry, but cloud-based document storage and working and collaboration. So now I think lawyers are ready for the next thing, and it's opened their eyes to the fact that legal tech can change how they work and can change how they work for the better. So I don't think there's necessarily a single big bang that I think is coming. But certainly that slow erosion is actually where you get the real change. And I think the market in 5 or 10 years will be totally different from how it is now, but probably in lots of ways we'd expect. But it's just taken a while to get there. But I think that we're on the cusp of that kind of transformation. In terms of something a bit more exciting, I do think that unlocking data and the availability of that data is starting to turn a corner. I think we're seeing more openness from many firms and players in the market to share data. And one particularly exciting thing that actually I've been working on at LexisNexis with the National Archives is creating a single repository of cases in the UK and giving access there to third parties. So there is that set of information that can be easily accessed and that you can mine that information. And one thing I definitely see from my colleagues at LexisNexis in the US, the nature of the US legal system being much more litigation based means that the data is much better structured and much more readily available. And they are able to build significantly more advanced analytics tools off the back of that. So I think getting a bit of that attitude towards common data standards, common data structuring and availability, and the openness to let people have access in a controlled way for sure, and with proper safeguards, but you need to open that up. And I think the benefits are very clear to see.
Thanks, Chris. Let's stay with you for now. So that's sort of the legal tech approach for those maybe who are sort of into it to greater or lesser extent on a day-to-day level. On a practical level, how do those, such as those on the call who are studying the law or who are interested in working with the law, how do they further their understanding of legal tech or even tech more generally while they're studying, if this is an area that they're interested in?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think the first thing I'd say is to not panic about this. It can seem overwhelming. You've got to learn to be a lawyer as well as learn to be a technologist somehow. And I'd say I'm both not a lawyer and also not a technologist. I studied politics, again for my sins, having to confess to a lot of sins, to study politics at university and kind of found my way into this. So it is possible, and you don't need to do everything in your couple of years at university. There is plenty of time for lifelong learning with this. The second thing is to be a really good lawyer first and foremost. I think you need to be really skilled, really comfortable with the core skills of law before you can really make the most of technology on top of that. So don't forget that, don't lose track of that. So I think that research, drafting, those core legal skills that you need on a day-to-day basis. Part of the reason for that is when you do go into practice in whatever setting, being really good at the day-to-day will both mean that you're probably one of the people who's more likely to be selected to pilot legal technology and to be part of the group that tests things like that. But also it means you yourself will have more kind of headspace if you can do the day-to-day well and you're not having to always worry about that, then it does mean you've got that little bit of extra cognitive capacity to think about the next thing. So I think that's really important. And we recognize that at LexisNexis, and I think we set up a certification on those core legal training skills that I think has been really helpful. Thousands of people do it every year, and it signals to employers as well that those core skills are in place. Then I think the second thing is to have a generalist approach to this. And this is a little hard because the law trains you in a very narrow, specific way to do certain tasks really, really well, really, really carefully, to a really high degree of detail. Actually, I think what you need is a generalist mentality and kind of intellectual dexterity to jump between things. To be quick to learn things, be flexible, read widely, and be open to new ideas. And I think where you do want to learn about technology, my suggestions would be keep it broad. I think there's any point trying to learn in depth a single platform. The market is too new and too fragmented, and there's too much change for you to say, oh, I'm going to learn how to use this one thing, because by the time you go into practice, the firm or the organization you work for might use something totally different. Or even if they don't, I guarantee you in 3 years' time, it won't look anything like it did 3 years previously. So it's not about learning a tool or learning a specific set of tools. I think it's also not about coding. This was mentioned right at the start. Unless you want to be a coder, and it's an interesting job, but if you want to be a lawyer, you don't need to be a coder to use legal technology. I do think there's some familiarity with high-level concepts in technology and computer science is useful. And some of those kind of introductory 101 courses in computer science and different programming languages, it's not essential, but I think it's really valuable. And I found moving from a generalist background into a technology role, that actually creating that base layer of knowledge that you can then top up over time is really important. And there are lots of really interesting courses out there. If you go on Coursera or some of the free Udemy, some of the free providers, Google and Microsoft have really, really well structured, really good introductory learning as well. And lots of the big universities have free online courses you can do. So that's the one thing that I think if you want to learn about technology, create that broad layer of knowledge before you get too specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing I would add to that is that law firms themselves are, whether they want to or not, being forced to look at legal tech themselves, and they want to be saying to their clients that they have these capabilities and that they can increasingly work more efficiently or at a lower cost. So I'd always say have a look at the law firms' websites. Obviously lots of the Magic Circle firms, including my own, will be doing a lot of work in this area, and there will be a wealth of stuff on their websites about the legal tech that they are pushing. So for example, Cliff Chance has an application called CC Draft, which is sort of fairly self-explanatory what it helps with, but it's something that law firms don't keep the stuff quiet. So research is obviously a very key part of being a lawyer, but there is a lot out there on legal tech, and there are a lot of opportunities. So Nick, you mentioned when we spoke before this about a virtual experience at Mind Foundry that would be available to those on the call.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I would echo what Chris said about just being curious about things. As somebody who's been working in the design of products and technology, I've had to kind of reinvent myself and the skills that I consider useful every 3 or 4 years, because some tool comes and replaces it and can do instantly what took me hours to do, and that's likely to happen. And so the best way to kind of just stay on top of that is to just be curious and watch it as it happens. Otherwise, it'll be scary if you kind of don't look at it for a few years and then you just wake up one day and everything has changed. With respect to AI in particular, I work for an AI company, but I think it's safe to say that the writing is on the wall, and that artificial intelligence and machine learning and these technologies will be so pervasive in the world of the very near future. Things will just become easier. Everything's going to be more connected. We won't even talk about AI and machine learning anymore. It'll just be the kind of special intelligence that flows through all of our digital products that we just have come to expect. And there is a strong, many forms of artificial intelligence have a sense of agency, and working with that is kind of like working with someone on your team. And the challenge for all of us as humans is, as we grow up, from day one, we stare into, our mother's eyes, and we observe the world around us, and we make sense of all of the relationships, and we gain an intuition for what it is to work with people. But we are going to be working with artificial intelligence, and none of us really have an intuitive understanding of what that's like. And we don't have the experience yet to really navigate that either, or have any kind of a sense for it. So what we've done, we found that all of our customers face this, and though we have a lot of amazing tech, they don't really, have that aha moment of how they can plug it in. And so we had to create a really extensive digital academy that's several tens of hours of content. And one of them focuses specifically on how do you design ethical AI systems responsibly. And since that one is particularly useful, it seems like to issues of justice, because justice is about fairness. And if you don't design the systems with considerations for ethics, as Frankie mentioned, then unfairness and injustice will arise everywhere. If anybody who's on this call wants to take that course, it's about 6 or 7 modules on differential privacy, model explainability, and some of it'll go deeper into some of the topics we've addressed. We can just make that available for free. So just reach out to us through an email that will probably come after this call. But those kinds of things help you kind of gain an intuition for working with these new forms of intelligence that are part of our everyday world now.
Great. So there's at least 2 opportunities. To add one more, there is a Clifford Chance Global cybersecurity internship, so available outside the UK as well. That again, it's the idea of trying to sort of broaden your thinking and your awareness of sort of bigger topics. And I think Nick's absolutely right. To stay curious is absolutely, I think, the key for enabling you to have things to talk about in interviews, enable you to sort of serve your clients better, to stay ahead of the competition, to look for new areas of practice, to keep yourself interested, when you're doing the same deal over and over again. So some really good opportunities there to look into. So the final area I'd like to talk to before we look at a couple more questions. There is a very sort of tried and tested traditional route for law students, whether it be to sort of the bar or to traditional law firms, but actually tech and legal tech do provide perhaps some more alternative routes to look into. And it isn't necessarily the case, I would say, that going to a traditional law firm means you sort of give up your interest in tech. So I know, Charles, you've got a good example of investment that you're doing at Legislate to give these sort of opportunities.
Yeah, so I think that, as I've never been a law student, or I'm not a lawyer, but I think, and I appreciate there's a lot of focus on training contracts and joining a law firm, and there's a lot of pressure because there aren't many training contracts. And I think one good thing that the SRA have done in the past year is open up training via work experience, obviously supervised by a lawyer. And most legal tech companies do have their own general counsels. And so as we do at Legislate, and therefore that means that law students can qualify for experience at legal tech companies, or law graduates, sorry, can qualify. And that's something that we're doing at Legislate. And I think the benefit of taking this route is it also exposes you to real world business problems that maybe you wouldn't appreciate working in a law firm. Obviously, you have great experiences in a law firm, but you also have great experiences in a startup, and which will also help you then become a better lawyer and solicitor. And finally, the other benefit of taking this route is it's never too late to qualify, in the sense that you can very well go down a certain route and then switch back into qualification. You don't need to qualify as soon as you graduate.
Absolutely. And I think we're increasingly seeing people being sort of very agile with their careers, doing something after university, which isn't necessarily the end game of where they're getting to, but really building up experience along the way. And I think what Charles has talked about, there are sort of legal opportunities within a tech firm, but similarly, there are sort of tech opportunities within traditional law firms. So Clifford Chance has a tech focused training contract called Ignite, where it's for people who sort of want to qualify as lawyers, but they're interested in, or they have an aptitude for tech. So it's a really good way of, keeping your interest in both, alive at the same time, whether that's because you want to end up being sort of private practice tech specialist lawyer, or because you're interested in going, for example, in-house into a tech firm in the future as a lawyer. And the other thing we have is we have an arm called Clifford Chance Applied Solutions, which is looking at developing sort of legal tech solutions for those who we wouldn't necessarily normally work with, because we are kind of quite top of market in terms of rates, but it gives people access to our legal capabilities, maybe at a slightly lower level. So there's a couple of examples there, and lots of the big firms will have versions of those, so it is really worth spending some time on their websites if you're still looking for that traditional law route at the same time. So we've had some questions in. We've sort of picked up one of those already. I'd like to go back a little bit to a question we had earlier, and Frankie, if you'd be kind enough to address this one. So we have had somebody ask, can we say that skewed data to feed for algorithms may be one of the challenges of using AI?
I think definitely. And I think something that, just to kind of take a step back from that specific question first, I think bias is something that comes up a lot, and I think it's really useful to understand the differences in the kind of bias. So I think typically when we talk, usually I think people refer to like prejudice against a certain group of people, but more broadly, statistical bias can mean that the data that you have is not really representative of what you're trying to measure. And I think that's really important to recognize. But to answer that kind of question more specifically, to kind of talk a bit more about something that I did before Mind Foundry, which was working at a sort of research and innovation center for AI, we looked at a lot of different data. Some of it was crime data. And when you go into it quite deeply, I think it's quite fascinating to kind of realize all of the errors that can be in it for so many different reasons. So for example, there were times where it looked like there was a lot of crime happening specifically in front of police stations, but it wasn't the case that was actually happening. The way it was just being labeled was incorrect. Or, it might be that a certain area seems like it has way more crime, but that's only the crime that's reported, and people are much more likely to report a crime if they're in walking distance of a police station. And there were all these kind of like inferences that were made based on imperfect data. And of course, I think in general, I would encourage people to, look at data in that critical sense and analytic sense, and how it was captured and for what reason and by who, because that can sort of paint a narrower picture of what that data is actually representing.
Failure to unmute. Great, thank you. Let's go to Chris for one of the questions asked. So Chris, someone has asked whether we think that legal tech will bring the cost of legal services down. Now, from my point of view, there are a number of sort of factors to consider as well as cost. And some of my clients are much more cost sensitive than others. But what are your thoughts on what legal tech can give?
Yeah, I think certainly in the medium term, the answer is undoubtedly yes. If you think about, you're only going to get adoption and you're only going to get value from legal technology if it's helping you do things quicker or helping you do things better. And ultimately, you might be able to do some interesting stuff that doesn't address that, but I don't think they're the solutions that will stick in the market. I totally accept, certainly lots of law firms think that lots of legal tech is expensive and actually adding to their cost line and not helping with ROI. And possibly, again, that's a function of the early phases we were in with the market. But definitely, I think now there's much more expectation of return on investment for legal technology. And clients want to see that this is saving them time, that it's helping them deliver work better. And that will naturally flow through into the costs for legal services. And I think, therefore, it was funny, I was at Christmas meeting up with family and being asked, well, what is it you do, and does that do any good for the world? And I think actually it really does. And at LexisNexis, we have a very strong, very long commitment to the rule of law and access to justice. And ultimately, I wouldn't be doing and wouldn't be as passionate about what I do if I didn't think that helping lawyers do their jobs ultimately helps society and helps people access the law. And we've got, we're just doing some research at LexisNexis at the moment about access to justice and deserts of provision, i.e. areas where people need access, but they either can't afford it or it's not available. And I think technology is the silver bullet there. Linking up supply and demand and reducing costs can only be done at scale through technology. So I would say persist with it, it will come, but there's no doubt about the medium-term direction of travel.
Thank you. And Charles, you were talking earlier about sort of the unlawyered, rather than sort of using various templates that are out there that the basis on which they're drafted or the source of them is perhaps unreliable, about legislate providing that sort of tried and tested framework for the unlawyered to use. What's the feeling around cost of legal service, and how important is that, do you think, to your customers?
Yeah, so I think there are certain services that customers just don't want to pay for, and I think that's kind of ingrained in their nature and their industry. So those users will always, they will prefer a unverified template that they can download for free versus a lawyer-approved contract they can purchase for £10 from Legislate. However, I do think where there is, costs will go down are for things like employment contracts, which law firms can produce an employment contract template for £1,000, and I think that's what we'll see less of, because at least at Legislate we can offer the same employment contracts but tailored each time to each employee, and I think that's where we'll see changes. But I do think, though, if we take a step back and think about law and contracts, it's all about risk management, and that means that every customer has their own sensitivity to risk. Lawyers have their own sensitivity to risk. They're risk averse because by nature and by qualification they have to be. And so I think there is value in lawyers and solicitors taking their time and being slow, because I think that sometimes leads to better or more thoughtful decisions. So I don't think all the costs will go down. I think they'll still be high. I mean, it will still be expensive for certain services, but these will be highly don't want to have to.
So another question we've had is, do the panelists believe that accessibility and understanding of technology constitutes a big part of legal tech? I wonder, Charles, while we have you, if we could start with you here. Obviously your clients are, or your customers are, the unlawyered, and so they don't have sort of the legal background, and presumably they also are not technologists. So how much do you think that they need to have that understanding, or is what you do a large part of it trying to provide that accessibility and provide something that they can sort of get their head around without needing to have those backgrounds?
I think education is really important. One thing that we do a lot at Legislate is we produce guidance notes, blog articles, which help. We've had feedback from users who, for example, will read the government's guidance on a contract, and they actually understand this, and then they'll use Legislate and create their contract. So I think what we do is we do bridge the understanding gap, because the often what we find publicly available from the institutions are just too difficult for the majority of people, and this is even educated people who simply don't have a background in law, don't understand legalese, and that's kind of where we bridge that gap. So I do think education is important, just at the first instance of understanding at a high what the law says, or what rules are, and then afterwards at the contract level. I think what we do at Legislate is we break down a contract as a set of questions and answers, and highlight in a contract which portions of the contract have inline explanations, so that people can connect the dots. And finally, one thing that we do at Legislate is, obviously we source our clauses from the gold standard libraries, but we the additional effort of simplifying them and writing them in plain English, so that people who are creating contracts on Legislate actually understand what they're signing. Because we find that obviously there's some people who will sign without reading, but 99.9% of people like reading what they're about to sign, and that's why it's really important that it's written in plain English.
That's really helpful, thank you. So we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to take advantage of being the chair of this, just to sort of go back to where we started on this. So the International Law Book Facility, it was our 15th anniversary year last year, and we're really proud of the way in which we provided legal resources to people all around the world to enable them to be better lawyers, to increase access to justice for non-lawyers, and to enforce the rule of law. And so we clearly are in a transition process where technology will become increasingly important, but we're still very much at the paper stage. But I think when Professor Richard Susskind gave his address at our anniversary event, he did say, in 2030, which really isn't that long away now, there will be huge changes in our lives from technologies that haven't been invented yet. And he said, do you want to compete with these emerging systems, or do you want to build them, as Katrina said at the beginning? And I think, whether you're going to compete with them, which I think is a bold move, or whether you're going to, build them, really get into the technology, I think either way, I think the theme of tonight is sort of stay curious, read as much as you can, take advantage of all these virtual internships. In a way, that maybe one benefit to come out of COVID is that firms are increasingly investing in these types of courses that you can access from wherever you are. So you really, really take advantage of that, because there's loads and loads out there. And I think, lawyers of the future, I don't think you can avoid staying in touch with technology and taking on the challenge of technology. So I think stay curious, take advantage of all the resources that are out there, and hopefully some of you as well will want to build those emerging systems going forward that the rest of us will be using. So I'll just finish by saying, Katrina mentioned the essay competition, the ILBF's essay competition at the beginning, which is still open for entries. So if you have a look at the ILBF's website, which is ilbf.org.uk, all the details of the essay competition are on there. We've also got on there links to our YouTube channel, which has our 10th anniversary film and our 15th anniversary film, which are a really digestible way of understanding what we do as a charity and why we're making such a big fuss about this 15th anniversary, including this event. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you to Lexis for hosting and organising us. And thank you very much to Katrina, our Chief Exec, who spoke at the beginning, who is really the driving force of the charity. And of course, if anybody wants to help with the charity at any point, have a look at our website. There are loads of opportunities. The tech is, more on the books and taping of boxes side, but in the future it may be more dynamic. But I'll close there. So thank you, everybody.